despite its sporty appearance, it wasn't designed for tarmac racetracks. It was designed for the forests of Europe, the snow of Sweden, and the sand of the Sahara. And at one point, it was the fastest accelerating car in the world. This is the Ford RS200. Crazy thing is, the RS200 wasn't even going to exist originally. It was going to be an Escort. Why? Because the Escort was very successful for Ford. It had won them 2 driver championships and a manufacturer championship in the late 70s. So it was pretty darn good at WRC Group 4. Unfortunately, just as they were developing a turbocharged version called the 1800T, a little thing called the Audi Quattro showed up. And the Audi Quattro, with its all-wheel drive system, kind of dominated. And Ford realized they had no hope with a rear-wheel drive car. So they scrapped everything but the engine and began from the ground up. Now, first they did upgrade the engine from 1.6 liters to 1.8. And they gave it a better turbocharger to give it more power. Because they knew they could take those chances with the engine, because it's a Cosworth BDA, which is pretty darn good. I talked about it earlier on in my Cosworth episode. With the engine out of the way, it was time to move on to the car it would be in. And that was going to be a bit trickier than they initially thought, because you need all-wheel drive, fact. You need mid-engine, fact. Both of those are heavy, fact. And you need those because you want the handling of the Peugeot 205, which is an all-wheel drive mid-engine hatchback, which dominated WRC its debut year in 1985. So you need that for your rally car, okay? Problem is, that can be quite heavy. And Ford mandates a roll cage in their cars for safety purposes. And I mean a functional roll cage, looking at you, Lancia. Well, that's going to be a bit tricky. You gotta keep the weight down somehow in order to be competitive. So, Ford turned to the only group they know that made fiberglass bodies. Reliant. Yeah, the Reliant Ramen guys. So, we have a mid-engine sports car developed from the ground up that shares the headlights and the windshield with a Sierra, the engine from an Escort, and the body from a Reliant. But it does have a few other tricks up its sleeve, primarily in the suspension department. Because, first off, the suspension and chassis was designed by former Formula 1 engineers, and it features double wishbone suspension and twin dampers on all 4 wheels. That's 8 shocks on a single car, to make it more balanced and more drivable on the rough terrain you'll face in the WRC. Weighing just 2,400 pounds, making anywhere from 450 horsepower in racing trim to 250 horsepower on the road. That's a lot of power in the 80s from a Ford. And it's mid-engine. And it's all-wheel drive. What is going on? So, you would think that with their success in the past, their all-wheel drive, their mid-engine, it would be a recipe for more victories. Well, you're a bit wrong there. Their highest finishing position was 3rd at Rally Sweden in 1986. Why? Simple. Time. Audi had 5 years to develop the Quattro. Peugeot had 3. Ford won. When you're trying to compete in top-tier WRC, being 4 years behind on development isn't necessarily the best thing in the world. Okay? Let's just make that clear. And another thing about time, Group B died in 1986, following several fatal accidents, 2 of them involving Ford RS200s. And Ford couldn't develop the car fast enough to keep up with the end of Group B. Which is a shame because right as Group B was announced to be dead, they had just announced the evolution version of the RS200. The rally car made anywhere from 550 horsepower all the way up to 650 horsepower, going to all 4 wheels on an even lighter chassis. That meant 0 to 60 in 2.1 seconds on dirt. To put that into context, the fastest independently verified 0 to 60 test in the world for a production car is the Porsche 918 at 2.2 seconds on tarmac. And this was doing that 30 years ago on dirt. That's nuts. And the road version was even more impressive, because out of those 200 production cars I mentioned earlier, 24 of them were converted into the E2 models. And that engine was bumped up from 1.8 liters to 2.1, which meant 400 horsepower on the road car, some reporting in the 500 horsepower range. And in 1986, the production road car with license plates did 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds, a record that would hold for 12 years, beating out the V12, McLaren F1, the Bugatti EV110 with 4 turbochargers, Testarossas, Lamborghinis, Jaguars. It beat out a lot of them. It wasn't until Koenigsegg and Bugatti at the turn of the century even got close to the speed of that Ford off the line. It's nuts. Ford's RS200 was the definition of a failure, or maybe a missed opportunity would be the best word for it, in the WRC, but it did find success later on. You see, in national rallies across Europe, Group B was still allowed, so it dominated. Simple as that. It was going against the MG Metro 6R4, which is a very, 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 very good car. But the RS200 was more consistent, and therefore it won the British Rally Championship. And a 650 horsepower version won the FIA European Rally Cross Championship in 1991. And another one was entered in the IMSA GTO class somehow, but it had 750 horsepower. Unfortunately, it was going against factory teams from Nissan and Toyota and various other companies, and it just couldn't compete. But if you're looking for the ultimate RS200, for Pikes Peak, where they competed 4 years and had 900 horsepower and the craziest aerodynamics I have ever seen on a Ford, chances are we'll never see another Ford RS200 style ever again. Why? Simple. FIA abolished the mandatory production requirements for rally cars. From now on, every single rally car is purpose-built, sharing nothing but the shell of a road car. Which means there's no production versions, they're not having to make any requirements for that. Everything is custom built to order. And that makes me rather sad, because while the GT40 and the GT are regarded as America's finest mid-engine cars, we're forgetting that the only record Ford has ever had per performance wasn't from a GT, or a Mustang, or a Focus. It was from the RS200, a Ford that could put the fight to the McLaren F1, one of the greatest sports cars ever made, and a Ford could run rings around it at a quarter-mile drag strip. If you told anyone that today, especially in America, they would look at you in wild disbelief. And Ford has never had a successor to it. Sure, there's the new GT, which is mid-engined, but that's not designed for rallying. That's not all-wheel drive. And sure, it's faster than 60, but it's only 0.3 of a second faster. And that's with a gap of 30 years. I know, especially with the recent movies coming out and everything, that the GT and the GT40 will be remembered as America's finest mid-engine car. But I think we all need to take a moment to appreciate the magnificence of the RS200.